Hello, everyone. This is Nicole McLean, and thank you for tuning in. This video is on general training and exam preparation. Before I go any further, I need to address a question that came through to my social media. They wanted to know what is the difference between the CPC and the CCS. So let's talk about the difference between those two. The CPC is your physician's coder. That is your outpatient physician's coder. The CCS is your inpatient facility coder. Both of those credentials are really good credentials. They're offered between two different organizations. The CPC comes from AAPC. The CCS comes through AHIMA. Regardless of which one you decide to take, please make sure that you do your research. Please make sure that if you're pursuing the CPC or if you know someone who's pursuing the CPC, make sure that they are receiving their training from an AAPC approved instructor, which is also called a PMCC. So make sure that they are receiving their training, or you yourself are receiving that training from this type of instructor. Very, very important. Also, same goes for the CCS. If you're seeking to obtain the CCS, my recommendation would be to go onto AHIMA's website, look at the approved curriculum, look at the approved schools, locate an instructor through them that actually has the credential that you are seeking and has the ability to instruct and to train you properly. So my recommendation also is that you pursue them both, just so that you can become more marketable. You always want to expand and expound on your skill sets. There's no way you can go wrong with that. So I hope that helps answer your question on those two. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me at jewvons.inc@gmail.com. That is jewvons, jewvons.inc @gmail.com. And all of your questions and concerns can be sent to me directly. Okay, now moving on. The rest of the video is going to be really focused on some different points for the CPC exam and preparation. So I'm going to be talking about some different things that kind of, people have a lot of questions about, a lot of, sometimes they're unsure, sometimes they've been bothered, sometimes they've heard a lot of things that have kind of scared them away, make them feel like I can't do this, this is not for me. So I want to encourage you that, you can. So we want to talk about one of the first things that you need to know after you obtain the correct instructor or training facility. You want to make sure that you have a foundation in medical terminology and anatomy as it relates to coding. Now, sometimes we've been scared into thinking that I don't know medical terminology, or that's too hard, I don't know anatomy, but you're going to have to know it as it relates to a coder, which means that you're going to learn it, and you're going to learn it a little bit different than you normally would learn it in like a med school or something like that. So, but just understanding first and foremost, what is medical terminology? Medical terminology is the language of medicine. That is your foundation for learning how to have a conversation between yourself and your providers, yourself and the insurance companies, yourself and the patients. So medical terminology is very, very vital so that you can know how to communicate with the providers, insurance companies, patients, and so that they can know how to communicate with you. So again, that is the language of medicine. That is the universal language of medicine. So that is very vital that you know that. The other portion is anatomy and physiology. This is the other part that people kind of tense up on. It's like, oh my goodness. So I want to encourage your hearts. You can do anatomy and physiology as well. And it begins with the understanding of what they are. So when you look at those two, it's two separate words, but it's combined under one area. Anatomy deals simply with the structure of the body. The anatomy says an arm is an arm. An arm is not a leg, and this is where anatomically it should be positioned. This is where it should be located at. So this is the arm, and this is what makes up the arm. So when we're talking about anatomy, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at structure. When we look at physiology, however, we're now looking at function. We're looking at, even though we have an arm, does it work or does it not work? And if it doesn't work, then there's something wrong with the function. That's where our physiology part comes in at, and that's what actually creates our first coding piece, which is the diagnosis or the ICD-10 portion of it. So wanted to kind of give you that quick little lesson on that so that it kind of help ease you out a little bit concerning those areas. I'm looking at another screen here so I can make sure that I give you everything. So just bear with me here. The next thing, want to make sure that wherever you decide to take your training from, whenever you're preparing, whether you're preparing for the training from the beginning, whether you're preparing to take the CPC or the CCS exam, whatever you're preparing to take, those coding manuals, make sure that you have the proper coding manuals. You should be using the coding manuals for the current year that exam is being offered. Please make sure you have the coding manuals for the current year that the exam is being offered. So if you're taking your training, if you started your training in 2018 and you began to test in 2019, the recommendation is that you have your 2019 coding manuals for exam purposes. Just to make sure that you have everything that you need, because once exams are created, they're created for that particular year. So please make sure that you have the current manuals, and don't listen to the cliches or the sayings that, well, you don't have to worry about it, they don't change that much. Sometimes that's true. Certain parts of it doesn't change, but there's always changes. So the thing is, we don't know what changes, which changes are, until we actually get the manuals and or go online and get the updates and things of that nature. So definitely recommend that you use the current coding manuals for the current year when you're taking a class and or when you're testing or preparing for the exams. You just want to reduce your errors. You don't want to have errors that you don't have to have. So let's keep that in mind, the manuals for the current year. As a candidate for the exam, you're going to have to know which manual to use when. So those of you that do not know, if you're taking or preparing for the CPC, if you're preparing to take the CPC course, there's going to be 3 coding manuals involved. There's going to be one that's called ICD-10. That is your largest manual. It is your diagnostic coding manual. It stands for International Classification of Diseases, 10th Revision, Clinical Modification. Okay, that's your ICD-10 CM. That is your diagnostic coding manuals. Every diagnosis that is found on a patient, every reason for the encounter, every illness, condition, injury is found in the ICD-10 manual. So when you're sitting down taking the exam, an exam is asking you to code for the ICD-10, then that's the manual you should be looking in. You should not be looking in the CPT or your HCPCS manual. So you have to know which coding manual to use when. Very, very, very important, very imperative that you understand that. When also, as you're looking at the ICD-10 manual, there's like 21 chapters. There's 21 chapters. So if you're going through a coding program, like my program actually teaches all 21 chapters. We have a very extensive program. So I just think that's very important, because you don't know what your exam is going to ask you for. You don't know which systems you're going to have more questions in or anything like that. So every exam is different. So you want to make sure that you have been trained and well prepared on all 21 chapters. Okay, so that one is another recommendation. The other manual that you're going to have is called CPT. You heard me mention that a few moments ago. CPT stands for Current Procedural Terminology. That manual is our procedural coding manual. That is our action. That is the one where our physician's revenue is generated from. So the CPT and HCPCS, we're going to be looking at both of those. But CPT, we're going to focus on that for just a moment. This one is our coding manual that focuses on the procedures. It focuses on 6 main sections. It has an evaluation management section, which is where your office visits, hospital visits, like your places of service, where you're going to have services. That's what you find in that particular area of the CPT manual. One of the other sections that you're going to see right behind the evaluation management is going to be your anesthesia. Your anesthesia section teaches us how to do anesthetic coding for anesthesiologists or whoever's administering anesthesia. prior to a patient getting ready to have any type of surgical procedures. Right behind that, you're going to see the surgery section. The surgery section is the largest section in the CPT manual, very, very huge, and it contains every specialty, every type of surgeon, every type of surgery that you can have or possibly have done on a patient. So if you are looking into doing general surgery, or you want to specialize in a particular surgical coding, then these are the areas that you're going to have to go in and make sure that you know how to code from these areas. After surgery, we're going to have the radiology section. The radiology section, it deals with our ultrasounds and sonograms, um, your EK, excuse me, not EKGs, but your radiology areas, things like X-rays, MRIs, MRAs, that is in your radiology section. So you want to make sure that you understand where to go when you're looking for certain items. After radiology, you're going to have your path and lab section, or your lab and path. This is where we deal with like the body fluids, where we're dealing with blood and urine, and we're dealing with panels and things of that nature. So again, that's like your fifth section in your CPT manual. And then your sixth section in the manual is going to be your medicine section. The medicine is like a catch-all. It lists every other procedure that you don't find in your surgical sections and things of that nature. Now, this is where you find EKG. This is where you find dialysis. This is where you find like psychiatry, physical therapy, things of that nature. So the medicine is the next largest section in your CPT manual. So those are your six major sections, but then there's two supplemental sections that you definitely want to be familiar with too, that you probably don't hear a lot about, and that's going to be your category 1 and also your category 2. So they're at the end of the medicine section. They fall right behind it in a little red section. So one of them is going to be dealing with performance measurement, and then the other one is going to be dealing with your temporary codes that you have to use in place of an unlisted code. So it's going to be very vital, and I'll be talking about that more in a later video, how to use the category 1 codes, how to use category 2 codes, when do I use them. And I'll just give you a quick tip here for your category 3 codes. If you come across a procedure that shows as an unlisted code, you have to search for category 3 first before you can use an unlisted code. You can only use unlisted if a category 3 is non-existent for that same procedure that you're trying to code. So that's a quick tip, and again, we'll be talking about that in a later video. So we're going to keep moving on. The next code set I want to mention to you is going to be your HCPCS coding. Your HCPCS is the final code set that we want to talk about. That one is a type of procedure coding. The main thing that HCPCS fosters is going to be things like durable medical equipment, DME. You may have seen DME in medical records, or if you work with a Medicaid provider, then you'll see a lot of DME stuff. But this is where they deal with infusions and IVs and things of that nature. They have a drug and chemical, what we call drug and chemical, but it's table of drugs and biologicals, where they deal with medications that's administered other than by the oral mouth method. So HCPCS is another form of revenue generation. So we want to make sure that we understand, again, what manual to use. This is the manual that was one of the original code sets that was actually written by Medicare. If you're dealing with Medicare and Medicaid, you definitely want to be using HCPCS versus your CPT first. So that's another tip, that if you're dealing with Medicare and Medicaid, you should be actually looking at HCPCS instead of looking at CPT. If the code that you're trying to find does not exist in HCPCS, then you are allowed to use the CPT code for Medicare and Medicaid. HCPCS also contains an IOM, or an internet-only manual, that has a lot of billing information, has some coding information in there. So it's found at the very back of the book. The HCPCS has several appendices that are very, very helpful. So you want to make sure that you understand how to use these manuals, because if you're trying to sit there take a CPC and you don't know which book to use, then you're in major trouble, honestly. So you have to understand what is contained in each book, and how do I know which book to use when. You're going to be looking at the very last question on your CPC exam, those of you that's doing a CPC exam prep, you're going to look at the very last question. It will simply ask you, what is the ICD-10 codes for this encounter, or what are the CPT codes, or to tell you the code for both, or it may ask you to code for this Medicare patient, the procedures for this Medicare patient, and it will give you CPT and HCPCS code, or it's a Medicaid patient. So you got to look for keywords and understand the terminology. What exactly are they asking for? So that's a generalization on the 3 code sets, the 3 coding manuals that you have to use while you're taking the CPC exam, and those that's planning to go into this the training or make it a career. Just understand that this is kind of a intro to what you got to look forward to. The next thing I want to talk to you about is, what do I need to know about ICD-10? So this is, for those, again, who's preparing for the exam, as well as those who's looking to start an actual career as a coder. So what you need to know about ICD-10, I have a list of things here, so y'all bear with me. Before attempting to code anything in ICD-10, you must become familiar with your conventions, which is your instructional notes that's found in section 1A. You have to become familiar with your general coding guidelines. That's also found under section 1, but it's going to be under letter B. And you also need to be familiar with your chapter-specific guidelines, which is found in section 1, letter C. So let me give you a little bit of background on each one of those. Section 1A contains your conventions. Your conventions are instructional notes. They give you, you'll see things like excludes 1, excludes 2. You'll see things like the use of the word and or with. So it gives you some instructional notes that tells you, when I come to the code in this tabular, then this instructional note tells me what I can or cannot do, or what I should or should not do. You may see code first, you may see use additional, you may see code also. All of those are conventions. It is your job to understand that when you see a code first note beside a code or underneath a code, then it's going to tell you you got to code something else before you can code the code that you're actually looking at. So that typically means that there's a manifestation or additional codes, things of that nature. So very in-depth studying is required for that. So you also, the same thing if you see use additional. Use additional means that you're going to code these codes second, always. Just think about additional, use additional. So it means that the code is telling you to use additional. Those codes are going to be your secondary codes. Code also. When you study that convention, that code also does not give us any sequence and direction. It just depends on the reason for the encounter. So that's just some examples of some of the conventions that you're going to see. You're going to see things like manifestation codes. Typically, they're shaded in blue, but sometimes they're not. And if you don't know your conventions, you would tend to think that every manifestation code has a blue shade. It does not. If you look at the conventions very carefully, some of the manifestation codes actually end with "in diseases classified elsewhere," but they're not shaded in blue. So those are some of the instructional notes. Just give you some examples of how important the conventions are, because they give us sequence and direction. There's things that we have to learn at manifestation codes never primary. We have to know that, code first means it coded first. Use additional means it coded second. We have to know that and could mean 1 or 2. We have to know that with is associated with due to. And when you have a due to comes first, unless you have a convention that tells you to use it as additional. So that's just kind of, a little bit about the section 1A. When you go under the general coding guidelines, under section 1B, you have things like, acute and chronic conditions. How do you code symptoms and signs? How do you code symptoms and signs as it relates to unspecified codes? So you've got some very specific guidelines, very specific instructions, very specific rules and regulations. So it is imperative that you follow those rules and those regulations. Under section 1C, very important section here. Section 1C is your chapter-specific guidelines. Your chapter-specific guidelines shows you all 21 chapters, and it shows you every chapter that has a guideline. The guideline gives us really good instructional notes, sequence information. There's some chapters that you're going to find that says reserved for future guideline expansion. That means they don't have any guidelines at this point for this edition as of yet. So if it don't have any guidelines, the only thing that you're forced to do is go by the conventions. So you have to understand that sometimes there's going to be a conflict between guidelines and conventions, and there's going to be a rule that tells you that you're going to use your conventions. You're going to obey the conventions versus the guidelines. But generally, we're going to follow our guidelines for every chapter. So just say, for example, section 1C under chapter 1, that is our infectious and parasitic diseases. So when we look at the table of contents in those areas, the table of contents shows us things like MRSA, it shows us things like HIV, and it tells us if the patient is diagnosed with MRSA or HIV, here is a guideline that tells you how to code it. So very imperative that you look at that information. So because you're going to see that on your CPC exam, you're going to see that during your training. So you need to know how to code that, and you need to know where to go find your relevant information at. Okay. Some of the other things, like for the ICD-10, before you do anything, y'all, I have this method that says read. I always tell everybody reading is fundamental. I have my own acronym that I created for READ, for literally READ. When you think about the acronym, I want you to keep this in mind. My R stands for reference and review records or material. Reference and review records or the material. And when you review something, you're really looking at everything. You're looking at this documentation. You're looking at, does this information make sense? Is it clear? Is it missing something? So you're doing all this in your as part of your review. Your E, examine and explain the record or the material. So once you have reviewed it, you referenced it, you reviewed it, can you now, upon examination, can you explain to yourself or someone else what you just reviewed? Can you tell them specifically what this record is talking about? Okay. The next thing, the A. The A is assess for accuracy of the information. So we're still sort of investigating. We're still looking. So we're still looking for accurate information. We're still doing our assessment. We're still looking because we're not ready to code yet. We're not ready to code yet. We're getting there at this point because we're doing our final assessment. We're making sure everything is accurate. If everything is accurate, now we're ready to look for our ICD-10. This is where the ICD-10 is formed at. This is where the actual assessment, which is also the diagnosis of a patient. So this is where the ICD-10 is formed at. So we're now ready to assign our ICD-10 code once we have done the prior steps. The last letter is D. D is dissect and assign the appropriate diagnosis. We're going to dissect the record by breaking it down into SOAP notes. Some of us have heard of SOAP notes before. Some of us only know it as subjective, objective assessment and plan. And I just want to kind of give you a little bit more briefing on a SOAP note, and I'll be talking about it in a later video. But SOAP, when you look at that, it does stand for that is the acronym. Subjective is the S, but that is your patient's chief complaint. That is what they're coming in saying, this is what I'm coming in to see the doctor for, this is what's wrong with me, this is my problem, as I know it. Okay? The objective part, physician comes in, now he or she has an opinion, so they're going to perform an objective exam, meaning I hear what you're saying, and based on what you said, I'm going to now perform an exam. I'm gonna check out what you said. I'm gonna look at some other things and see if I can make a determination on your diagnosis. So that is an objective exam. Sometimes, this is where the vital signs come in at. This is where sometimes they'll order, other tests, or they may say, well, we're gonna send you for a radiological exam, and so we can look at this a little bit further, a little bit deeper. There may be a physical exam, but there's some type of exam that's performed at the objective portion of it. After the objective portion, then we're going to have the A. Okay, the A is also where they're going to now form their assessment. This is where the physician now says, okay, I heard what you said. I performed the exam. I've checked you, and these are my findings. So this is actually where the physician findings are located at. This is where now ICD-10 has now been confirmed. So the assessment portion, just like in the read, the A was assessed. This is where the physician has now performed in the exam, and he's now said, these are the findings, this is what's wrong with you. Sometimes this is definitive diagnosis, and sometimes it's signs and symptoms. And it goes back to our rules. It just depends on what the physician documents here. That's what we're going to code for our ICD-10. So if he or she documents a definitive diagnosis plus signs and symptoms, we got to go back to rules. Our rule says not to code signs and symptoms if there is a definitive diagnosis, unless it's not all covered in there. But very specific, you have to go back to your guidelines and your conventions to look at that. But generally, that is our rule. We don't code signs and symptoms when there's a definitive diagnosis. The other portion, the last portion of the SOAP note, is going to be the letter P. The P stands for plan. Okay? The plan is a course of treatment. Now that the patient has given their chief complaint in the S, now that the physician has performed an objective exam in the O, now that the physician now has a diagnosis or an ICD-10, now we got to come up with a plan. So the P's got to take care of the A. Now we're looking to prove medical necessity. Now we're looking at, okay, now we understand that, the patient had fallen and broke their arm or whatever, the x-ray showed a broken arm. So now our plan is to put a short arm cast on. So that's our course of treatment. This is now the action that we're taking. This is where the initial revenue begins at. Okay, this is when we get to this last step. Now our E&M can be fully assigned, because the E&M, we have to look at it: history, exam, medical decision making. So we have to go through all this SOAP before we can actually assign E&M. So that's kind of a briefing on the SOAP notes and the read method and all of that. So again, I'll be talking about that in a later video. If you need more understanding on that, if you need me to go deeper into that, then I can definitely do that at a later time. So I just want to give you some generalizations right now for the CPC, the overall CPC, and exam preparation. That was the ICD-10 portion of it. Now let's talk about the CPT. When we look at the CPT, we need to know what do we need to know in particular for the CPC. When you're dealing with the CPT, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you know these sections. You heard me mention the 6 major sections. I mentioned the evaluation and management, the anesthesia, the surgery, radiology, path and lab, and medicine. And then I gave you the supplement sections, which is categories 1 and category 2. But when you're coding for CPT or you're training for CPT, you need to know the sections. Once as you're preparing to code for CPT, you're going to find that the guidelines for CPT is going to be found at the front of each section. Unlike the ICD-10, the ICD-10 is found back in sections 1 through 4. But CPT is going to be found right in this section that you're coding, that particular section. So, for example, if you're coding for evaluation management, before you start coding evaluation management, you're going to see like some green pages. Those green pages shows your guidelines just before you get into the actual tabular portion of it. And it's going to be like that all the way through, where you're doing evaluation management, anesthesia, surgery, path and lab medicine, radiology. Doesn't matter. Those guidelines are found at the beginning of each section. Also, for your CPT, you're going to recognize them as 5-digit whole numbers, with the exception of categories 2 and 3. But other than those last 2 sections in the book, you're going to recognize them by knowing that they are 5-digit whole numbers. 5-digit whole numbers. The guidelines, again, are at the beginning of each section, and you will definitely want to know the guidelines. So just here's how I recommend that people learn or train on CPT and or ICD-10. When you're training, just say for example, if you're training for anesthesia, you want to go into that section before you try to code it. You want to make sure that you read read the guidelines. You want to make sure that you're not only reading, but you're comprehending what you're reading. So you need to be able to break them down. You need to be able to understand, what did I just read? Can I verbalize this? Can I give it back? Can I give back to my instructor? Can I give it back to a doctor? Can I give it back to an office manager? Can I give back what I just read? Am I able to do that? Okay, so that's going to be the first thing. That is very imperative that you read and comprehend the guidelines before you try and code it. There's a lot of information there. It's going to tell you the do's and the don'ts. It's going to tell you about physical status modifiers. It's going to tell you about qualifying circumstances. It's going to tell you so many things. So you want to be very mindful, as you go on system by system. Another thing in CPT that you have to know is that every system has internal guidelines. So when you're coding for anesthesia, even though you have read the guidelines prior to coding anything in that section, every time you come to a code, you need to look for any type of internal guidelines. Just say, for example, if you come to code 0001, I'm just giving you a random code. If when you look at that code, you need to look at the information prior to that code or anything following that code. Because what's going to happen if there's information that you need to know about that code, any additional information is going to precede that code. It's going to be like at the top, it's going to be before that code. So you want to read that information. That's your internal guideline. You also want to look at the information right beneath the code. So underneath your description, because a lot of times you'll have these things called parenthetical notes, and these are notes that's found in parentheses. So the parenthetical notes also give you further information. Sometimes it'll tell you don't use these two codes together. You can't code this and this on the same record. And so it's imperative that you follow that. Those are not found in your general guidelines. So when you come to a code, please make sure that you read everything prior to the code and everything that comes after the code underneath it. Okay. One of the examples I had written down for you to reference this is code 135 and 136. These are actually in the integumentary system. So if you have your CPT manual, you can go into the integumentary system, look at code 135 and code 136. And if you look at those codes, you're going to see some internal guidelines that's going to precede those codes, and you're going to see some internal parenthetical notes that comes after those codes. I wrote myself a note that says, if I'm attempting to assign these as my answer to an applicable scenario, I will need to refer to the paragraph above these codes. This is still 135 and 136. This is my internal guideline that gives me further guidance on how to assign these codes. Because when I look at the paragraph, it actually has those codes in there, and it tells me if I'm going to use these codes, if I'm going to assign these codes, it tells me how to assign them. The next thing I want you to do is refer to code 136. When you look at code 136, beneath that, you're going to see the parenthetical notes that you heard me mention. You're going to see some notes in parentheses. These are your further instructional notes concerning if I have to report 135, 136, what can I do and what I can't do with these codes. Very, very important. And you want to do that the whole time you're taking your CPC exam, so you never don't just look at the code and just stop there. Don't just think, well, I went to the index and I've arrived. I have my answer. You want to, once you come to the answer that is giving you, again, please look at everything prior, look at everything afterwards. Can't stress that enough. You want to continue in the same vein all the way to whether you're in CPC training or whether you're sitting for the CPC exam. So it does not matter whether you're training or taking the exam, you're going to follow the same rules, the same regulations. Okay, another area in the CPT manual, you have some appendixes there, and there's 14 appendixes. And I'm just going to kind of just briefly go through just a few. I'm not going to do all of them, but I will call them out. They go from A and they end at P. Now, one of the appendices that you're definitely going to need to pay close attention to is going to be Appendix A. Appendix A has all of your modifiers in it, or your CPT modifiers. It doesn't have all of them, but it has your CPT modifiers here. And in that Appendix A, you're going to have to understand that there's three main types of modifiers. And I've broken this down typically for my students to understand that the three main types of modifiers in this manual is going to be your evaluation management, your path and lab, and you got procedural modifiers. So that'll be another video because I don't want this one to be too long for you. But I will be doing a video on modifiers, or if there's anything else that you need me to do one on in particular, then I'll be glad to do that as well. But going back to Appendix A, that's going to have all of your CPT modifiers in it. So you have to know when to append it. Some of the ones that you're commonly going to see is going to be 24, 25, 57. Those are your E&M modifiers, and also 32. So, like an example, modifier 24, that modifier is only used with post-operative procedures. So just say, for example, if a patient has had an operation and they're coming back to the doctor's office for their follow-up, they're in their global period. And we know that global periods means that you got like a certain time frame or package. Just say, for example, if they had like heart surgery and they got a 90-day global and they're coming in and it's day 36. Okay, they come in for a follow-up, but they say, while I'm here, can you check my stomach because I've just been feeling nauseated, haven't felt too good this last couple of weeks or whatever. So the heart and the stomach doesn't have anything to do with each other. The heart doesn't have anything to do with the stomach problem. So that would be a separate evaluation management that has to be performed. So what you would do is code for the post-op, the follow-up with no charge for that. But then you will give a second E&M for the evaluation management of the stomach problem, and you will need to append modifier 24 to that because it is an unrelated procedure. It's not related to the surgery that the patient came in for. So we want to kind of keep that in mind. Modifiers can be a little difficult for people. So if you have a lot of trouble with that, send me an email or you can inbox me or call, and I'll be glad to assist you with that. One of the other appendixes, some of the others we have is going to be Appendix B. That's just your summary of additions and deletions, revisions. Appendix C is just clinical examples. Those you really, I don't use a lot of those because for example, Appendix B is going to show you additions. You're going to know new codes based off of the symbol. If you know your conventions, you're going to know that like the red dot means it's a new code. So in Appendix B just kind of just goes and give you a summary of everything that was added, everything that was deleted, everything that was revised. But you yet have conventions that tell you those same things. So you really don't have to refer back to that unless you just really want to. Appendix C is your clinical examples for like different types of assigning different types of evaluation management levels, and it's more of a reference area. Appendix D, very important appendix. This is your summary of add-on codes. And I say it's very important because every code that you see in Appendix D, if you go look it up in your manual, it's going to have a plus sign in front of it. Those plus signs means that these are add-on codes. Why is it important? Because you have to know that all these codes that have a plus sign in front of them cannot have a modifier 51 added to them. No matter if it is an additional procedure, even if it is a multiple procedure, you cannot add modifier 51 to an add-on code. And you will see that rule underneath your modifier 51 in Appendix A. So anything that has a plus sign, and it's a good exam tip. So if you're taking a CPC exam and you go and you look at these codes and just say if the codes have a 51 on them, the first thing that I would do is go to Appendix D to see if that code is in Appendix D. If it's found in Appendix D and it has a 51, I'm going to immediately eliminate my answer, those as my answers, because they cannot have 51 on them under any circumstances. So that's a kind of a quick CPC exam tip. Appendix E is right beside this, a very short list of additional codes that is also exempt from modifier 51. They don't have a plus sign in front of them, but they do have a symbol, this circle with the little half circle symbol there. So those are also exempt from mod 51. So you want to know that appendix as well. That is Appendix E. Know the symbol. Okay. Appendix F. This is appendix where modifier 63. These codes are exempt from modifier 63. You're going to see that deals with infants like 4 kilograms and that type of thing. So you want to make sure that you just familiarize yourself with these appendixes. familiarize yourself and make sure that you're looking at your symbols, your conventions, your iconography. All of that stuff is extremely important. Appendices G, H, and I are no longer valid for any type of information. They have been deleted in prior references. Appendix J, you don't really reference a lot unless you work in electrodiagnostic medicine. So I don't have a lot for you on that unless you work in that particular field. Then you definitely want to reference that particular appendix. Appendix K is going to be your products that's still pending. They are still FDA pending approval. So these like vaccines and things like that, they have not been approved yet by FDA. Appendix L, those that work in cardiovascular or working with catheterizations. This is going to be an important appendix for you. This shows you your vascular families, shows you the different orders based on first, second, third order catheterizations in this particular area. And in 2019 looks really different, looks a lot better. It's color coded, so the graphics are much, much better. So you can kind of understand the appendix L a little bit better, especially those of you, again, that's coding for different catheterizations. Appendix M is just your renumbered CPT codes. Don't really use that a whole lot, so because as of 2009, that method is no longer being used. So that's just more of a reference, so you don't have to really do anything with that. Appendix N, it shows your resequence codes. You'll recognize this by your iconography as well. Is the little, is the codes that's in red, and they have the numerical symbol next to them as well. So again, if you get to know the iconography in CPT, then you'll know this as well. Appendix O is your multi-analyte assays. These are laboratory codes, so unless you're working in a lab, then you're probably not going to have to be concerned with this particular area. But if you are working in a lab, then you definitely want to familiarize yourself with this particular Appendix O. Appendix P is your synchronous telemedicine codes. This is synchronous, means like real time. So you want to make sure that you look at Modifier 95 that's found in Appendix A that goes with these particular telemed codes. So that's fairly new. I believe they came on last year or the year before. So those are fairly new, but they do have Mod 59 that's associated with those telemed codes. So you want to make sure that you refer back to that portion. We're almost done. All right, so that was the CPT general information. So now the HCPCS. What do I need to know about HCPCS? HCPCS, you heard me mention that earlier. HCPCS is your DME, durable medical equipment, or your supplies. So this is where, again, you see like things like injections, infusions, Medicare stuff, Medicaid. You're going to see the outpatient prospective payment system information. You're going to see several different things here. This is your smallest coding manual, very small index, so it's not as in-depth as like your ICD-10 and CPT. But again, this is who you're going to use. This is the manual you're going to use with Medicare and Medicaid, so please, please, please keep that in mind. You're going to use it for supplies, DME. Know that when you recognize these codes, they are alphanumeric. So these codes actually begin with a letter and then they end with 4 numbers. So that's how they're different from your CPT and your ICD-10. Your CPT, remember, those are 5-digit whole numbers, except for category 2 and 3. They're going to have 4 numbers. They're going to end with the letter F or either T. And then HCPCS is going to begin with a letter and it's going to end with 4 numbers. So that's how you're going to recognize those. And make sure that you remember that this contains your IOM, your Internet Only Manual. It also contains several appendixes in HCPCS. These are great points of references. So depending on what vendor you get your HCPCS manual from, they will vary slightly, but you want to make sure that you do familiarize yourself with the appendixes found in HCPCS, because you got one that has abbreviations in it. So if you read through medical records, you don't understand this abbreviation, you don't know what they're talking about, you don't know what it means, don't know what it stands for. It actually has an area that breaks down all the abbreviations. So that's pretty cool. So you want to make sure that you familiarize yourself. And I always recommend the AAPC manuals. If you're planning for the CPC or training for CPC, I always recommend that you use the AAPC training manuals. because they are more conducive to your exam. So um, just kind of please keep that in mind. And I'll just tell you about a few of the appendixes, a few more of the appendix you have in HCPCS, in appendix in the AAPC manual. The appendix A is going to be the table of drugs and biologicals. Appendix B has your HCPCS modifier. So that is a huge deal. It's going to have the remaining modifiers. It's going to have all the ones you see in CPT plus all the ones you don't see in CPT. So this is where you get those other modifiers that you will not find in the cover of CPT. You will not find them in the Appendix A of CPT. They can only be found in the HCPCS manual. And there's a lot more modifiers, so you want to make sure that you please familiarize yourself with your HCPCS manual. Know how to go through it, know how to go through the appendixes. If you need help, you need to make sure that you ask. Make sure you understand. Do not sit for an exam and you don't know how to use your books. That is not good. Okay, an outcome will not be good. You also have in the AAPC manual in Appendix C, you have a list of the abbreviations. So sometimes you don't know what they mean. So they're in alphabetical order, and you can actually go into your HCPCS manual and find what this abbreviation means. In the Appendix D, you have the place and or type of service that shows here what the patient was and what type of service did the patient have. So if you're needing those codes, they're found in that HCPCS area as well. Excuse me. Appendix E is your payment status indicators. That's for those who's doing the OPPS and that type of thing. So if you're not doing outpatient prospective payment system, then that appendix won't apply to you. But if you are, then it's good for you to know that this is where this information is found at. Appendix F has your ASC payment indicators, your ambulatory surgery centers, that's ASC. Appendix G shows your correct coding edits, and it has columns 1, column 2, and also the modifiers that are applicable to these edits. So very helpful, very helpful. You're also going to have Appendix H. That's your general correct coding policies concerning E&M, your NCCI edits, your MUs, your medically unlikely edits, and then also your general policy statements. So you want to make sure that you know what you have in your hand or what you should have in your hand. This can cut down on a lot of denials and delays and rejections when we know how to use our resources. And the last appendix that they have is Appendix I. Is the publication references. This is the internet-only manual. This is where you find a printed version of the internet-only manual that was printed at the time of publication of the book. So really important. That's mainly for like billing, people that's doing like billing for Medicare and Medicaid. You see a bunch of the rules and you see some of the coding stuff in there as well. So it's a huge reference area. So I want you to know that that book is very important, very useful. Lots and lots of information. So that is the overview on all 3 of the coding manuals, making sure that if you're trying to pursue your career as a coder, that you know that there's 3 manuals involved. You need to be familiar with all 3 of them, know how to use all 3 of them, okay, effectively. I have some special notes I want to leave you with before we get ready to end the video. Always take good detailed notes. Write them in the sections that they are applicable to. You can turn to the back like of your CPT sections. At the very back it has a note section. So put things there that you don't understand, put things there that you've had a hard time with, words that were new to you, put them there. A new rule you learn or a new rule or rule that you're struggling with, put it in your notes, because anything that's written in your books, people, you can use for your exam. So you want to make sure that you take really good detailed notes. You want to use block and bubble method. We have a method that we call block, bubble, highlight, and underline. Block, bubble, highlight, and underline. And this is to make certain things stand out in your manual for you in certain systems, especially if you're having a tough time understanding the differences. So what I typically tell students is that I either underline or I circle the difference, and I'm always blocking in the family. I block in the family of codes that go together. So if I know if I go outside my block, I've gone outside the family. and now I'm in trouble. I'm coding it wrong. So now I'll talk to you more about that, depending on what you need assistance with. So I'm going to prepare to end this video. I just wanted to give you that information, just kind of helping you out for those, again, that's preparing for the CPC exam, those that seeking general training, just need some extra help. If you need additional assistance, or if you need us to look at a particular system with you that you're struggling with, we will be doing videos on particular systems. So, and we will go into various details. So if you would like that, then please email us at jewvons.inc at gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media. We have our Jewvons Medical Facebook page. We have an Instagram, Jewvons Medical Instagram. So we ask you to follow us there, and make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you can get the updates and highlights and things like that that we're doing. I'm not sure how often we're going to be doing it. It just kind of depends. So we have a couple of requests already in, so we're going to be putting some videos together for those particular requests. So if you have something that you need us to go over, then please let us know. I hope this video helped you a lot. We'd like to hear your feedback. So just send me an email and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening, and you all have a great evening, and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye.